Okay, well, I'm joined by Alok Matta, and we're here today to mainly discuss hackathons. Alok's had a lot of experience. He's a developer. But first of all, I'll let him, in his own words, tell us where he's come from. Alok, a little bit about your background, please.
Well, I originally come from India, but have been in the UK for a while, mostly in England, but for the last couple of years have been living up in Scotland, and absolutely love that. But more recently, sort of been back to London to get a bit more sort of back into the tech scene, and Shoreditch as well.
Always Shoreditch. Back in Scotland, were you actually in a city there, or were you living out in the wilds?
I did live out as wild as you can get, so like literally as wild as having a tent in your backpack and wild camping, and probably next to some really remote beach in the middle of an island, something of that sort. So yeah, I've been doing that, but no, that's not where I permanently lived. I did live quite close to a city, mostly Glasgow. I did live a little while in Edinburgh as well, but I would say Glasgow was my sort of home city while I was in Scotland.
And whilst you're up in Scotland, were you still part of a tech community? I mean, is there a tech community up there?
Well, I actually did go because the startup I was working at was accepted into an accelerator program out in Glasgow. So East Park, which is the accelerator. So yes, I was always working with startups and within technology. Less than perhaps what I did in London, but still technical. Yeah.
So obviously you've had experience in accelerator programs and hackathons, I'm assuming. How have you found hackathons to be useful?
Well, I think it's an extremely creative and I would say in a good way, an extreme process in terms of you trying to, especially if you're going to one that you know nothing about, which is sort of what I've been doing in the last sort of few weeks since I've been back. I think the whole idea of going to an environment where you possibly know nobody and have to come up with an idea that you want to spend the next sort of 2-3 days with, and then sell that to effectively a group of people that you don't know either. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty there. And yes, there's a bit of the prize element to it, which may or may not drive your behavior. But I think that still is an extremely creative process. And meeting people and trying to discover your individual talents. That's sort of also, I think, a bit of a challenge in a number of ways. And yes, there's obviously the element of maybe the lack of sleep, or how quickly you have to learn a new technology or a new business and try to pretty much pair them up and combine that in some sort of a meaningful way to sell to the judges. So that's quite I would say it's quite hard. I would say it's not as hard as some of the things I've done in Scotland, but it's not as hard as a wild camping or skiing down some mountain or sailing in the sort of west coast. But yes, it is still hard.
I'd imagine as well, it's essential for a team to have complementary skill set. So in other words, if you're a developer who writes in a certain language, by the way, which language do you write in?
So I've done a lot of historically, mostly sort of within the sort of open source world. Back-end PHP, more recently moved towards Node.js, and the companies I've been working out in Scotland have been sort of hardware IoT companies, so that sort of forced me to learn something more native, so really developed a liking for iOS Swift.
iOS Swift, something we don't hear too many developers loving, but you obviously do, right? Okay.
I think it's extremely popular. Well, it's for the old school iOS developers. Maybe they have a bit of we learned Objective-C and we're going to be purist about it. But I think for somebody who's getting started with the platform, I think it makes a brilliant choice. And I think Apple is certainly very keen to promote it to not just sort of professional, but also to kids, and trying to get them to code using the Swift playgrounds.
Which is our future at the end of the day. You've mentioned as well that since you've been back, you've only been back a couple of weeks, you've already been to at least one hackathon, if not two, right?
I've been to a few, yeah.
Few?
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned one yesterday, which was about drones, or had that as a background.
Yes, that was well. It was interesting in this case because I've almost sort of been back here a few weeks, and I'm trying to do something that's different every week. So let's try to do something to do with payments. Let's try to do something to do with image recognition and vision computing. Let's try to do something with bots, and I think so. I've done a bit of those. And yesterday, although it was a sort of bot-centric hackathon, I think we were the only team that didn't have a sort of a problem. What we did have was, yes, we all commonly joined in the interest that we all wanted to play with drones for whatever reason, and that we sort of started with that and then tried to evolve that into a use case that would work for the sort of challenge that was put across, which is a very insurance-centric.
And do you, at the end of this hackathon, get to actually fly a drone? In London, I'm talking, did you actually kind of go out the building? And
we did actually do that. We did realize that that breaks the law in a number of ways. But yes, we've even got a little video of us flying it within the office, and sort of a use case of how that would work in the insurance market. We have a drone with specific cameras. It would go around a certain accident spot or a hard-to-reach spot, take footage, process that, produce a three-dimensional representation of that somebody sort of back in the insurance team and the claims team can look at, and sort of along with some sort of machine AI-enabled heuristic analysis, try to work out what should be done.
I don't know if we'll be able to pick that up now, but maybe if you could, if you can send that to us, we might be able to interlink or put a link up with this interview. 'Cause that's fascinating. I think somewhere like immediately Haiti springs to mind after all its troubles, that a drone would help no end in trying to get relief out there, or at least look at the situation.
Yesterday was my first time playing with drones. I think yes, and the options are certainly vast, and where it could be is certainly unknown at this stage. But it certainly seems very promising. I had a lot of fun playing with that. I crashed it quite a lot of times.
Well, listen, I'm aware we don't have you for long. So just to wrap up, I mean, you've been up in Scotland, up in the wilds. You're now back in London. Obviously, you're a coder, you're a tech guy. How do you feel about being back in this area? I mean, being in Shoreditch, do you suddenly kind of feel like, oh, yes, this is Tech City again, or does it feel like just another place?
Shoreditch always had a sort of special place in my heart, because that's where I think I discovered the startup scene, sort of coming from a sort of corporate-ish background. And it's really sort of thrilling to be back here and meeting some of the people that I did know before I moved up, and sort of reconnecting with them, but also seeing everything that has changed, and sort of being in offices like these. It certainly feels very, very good. Yes, I'm absolutely thrilled, and I think apart from, I think it is really sort of representative of how London as a city is evolving in terms of, I know it's sort of from a negative side, does seem to be it's being gentrified, but I think that's true for any sort of city that's changing, and I think certainly it's really, really fascinating to be back here.
Well, look, it's great to have you back. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.